like growing up as a kid, my dad, like he passed away in 2020, but he was kind of abusive in those early years, and not just like not necessarily like all physical, even though there was like that, but there was also a lot of emotional. Like as a kid, I don't remember everything or even a lot of things, but what I do remember is like hiding behind the chair, just listening to him and my mom argue and fight and yell, and I'd be sitting there crying, just wanting to stop it, and then go run in the middle of it and try to get in the way. And it was just like as a kid growing up, seeing your father doing that, like you're looking, going like, all right, this is like dad, this is man, this is father, and so like I'm using that as obviously like it started showing me a perspective towards what a father is. And so I'll never forget when I was 9 years old, I got invited in on my bed, and I sat down at my bed. My dad's on one side, my mom's on the other side. And I remember them looking at me, and my mom was crying, which normally that's not a good sign. So like that puts me in this little mode as a little kid. I can remember like when mom was crying, that's bad. So like whatever you got to do to soften the environment, just do it. And so I remember them looking at me, and my dad saying like, son, I got to tell you something. Me and your mom are getting a divorce. And so the next morning at school, I mean, this is like a big pivotal thing, and it's helped mold a shape in who I am, which is why I'm going that long in it. But the next day at school, I walk into the homeroom, and my teacher's looking at me, and she's like, hey, Doug, come here. And I walk up to her desk, and I remember her looking at me, and this is back in like the 1990, so this is like a long time ago, and it was just a totally different environment. But I mean, back then, like the divorce rate was around like the teens. It was like 14 or 17%. So I mean, it wasn't like today where it's like in the 50s, and like 40 to 50% of our population's divorced once. It's like back then it was a rare thing. But I'm sitting there and my teacher goes, Doug, like, so what's going on? You don't seem like yourself today. And I remember looking at her and I was like, well, like last night, my parents sat me on my bed and said, we're getting a divorce. What's a divorce mean? And I'm like, literally, like, I didn't know at 9, like what that even meant. I'm asking my teacher, and like, here's this teacher in public school system that could have like told me anything she wanted to. And this is what she said. She said, a divorce is like a long vacation. Well, sweet then, because we've been on vacations in my house, like we've gone on vacations to Pennsylvania. We've seen our family. We've gone to these spots. So like literally she had no clue what she just told me and what that gave me. Like that was such a false hope. But I mean, I
Right.
went home, man, we never had a vacation that was over a week and a half long. Right. So like that's my framework at 9. I go home, and in our driveway, we had this massive live oak. And I mean, it was huge. It grew up. I mean, it was probably like a 65-foot tall. It's still in my mom's driveway now. But I remember I would climb that live oak, and I would look out like in this fork that I got up to. And it was like in one of the Ys in the tree where the branches split. And I'm sitting up there and I'm just watching down the street because we had about probably 13 houses of straight road right there. And I was looking down the street for those Ford headlights to come around 5:45, 6 o'clock, like they always had. I mean, dude, like a year and a half went by, and I'd found the roof, and I knew how to get on the pinnacle of the roof above the driveway where the garage was. And I would get up on the pinnacle and I would lay there because I wanted to see a little bit further than what that tree would allow me to. And literally that teacher's one statement, a divorce is like a long vacation, set me in a year and a half of bawling and crying several nights a week, just going like, why was I not good enough that my father would come home? And then there's this like season of my life, like a year and a half after that, where we had a babysitter come in. And I remember it's like, man, I'm sitting here with this lady who is like supposed to be watching over me and trusted by my single mother now, who's working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, behind the pillows where I wasn't allowed to look, or behind the blanket that would be put over us. Like stuff was going on. And as I'm being molested, I don't know this is like wrong. I just know that she's telling me to like keep watching the TV or keep your head forward. You can't tell anybody what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm a little kid. I'm like 11 years old going like, all right, like, I mean, if you're the one that's in charge telling me what to do and what not to do. And the bad part is like, you don't know that this stuff's like intentionally wrong unless somebody tells you about it. But nobody like walked me through the birds and the bees. Nobody walked me through these, like the differences between man and woman and all this kind of stuff. I mean, school sex ed came in like middle school. So it was like or late elementary school. So by this point, like I've already got stuff happening with a babysitter that I didn't even know what was going on. And I mean, it was just like, I know that sounds bad, but it was like real stuff. The way I'm
Yeah.
saying it, it's like being molested by my babysitter back then. I didn't know what was going on until I was 12 years old. And my best friend, his dad had saved for about a decade. He turned 13. His dad had 2 milk crates. Back then, milk crates were like these plastic boxes, and like he had 2 milk crates full of Penthouse and Hustler magazines. And all the guys in our neighborhood would go over there and check them out like library books, and would have to write out the date, the issue, and all this stuff. And that's how I found out what was happening behind the
Mhm.
pillow and the blanket. And it was like, so that sends you into like this addiction to like porn and master. I'm trying to reenact things that she was doing to try to feel the same things, to get the same whatever. It's like, man, it's so crazy, like, and the only reason I'm saying all this stuff is because this is real stuff. There are real people going through real scenarios like this. And it's like, nobody asked me, nobody talked to me, nobody listened to me share these things. Oh man, I was really angry. I was really in pain. I was really hurt, and I was really like, I was so all over the place because I just didn't know what was real or true. And people would say stuff like the vacation statement. Like, that was such a big moment in my life as a kid, and nobody even knew about that. And she could have said anything she wants to. And there's a reason why I bring that up again too, is because like God says that man should not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.
Come on.
And then Jesus comes on to say, he's like, I tell you the truth, man will give an account for every careless word spoken out of his mouth. There's another time where he says that it's, let him who speak do so as one speaking the very words of God. Ooh. And I just think like the power of death and life are in the tongue. Like our words are so powerful that like literally this teacher is trying to comfort me in a moment where a little 9-year-old seems off today. And she didn't even realize that like that sent me into depression. That same roof in the Pinnacle when I was 14 years old, I tried to dive off into my driveway to kill myself. And there was 2 times where I tried to like take my life at the same places that I was sitting up there crying and bawling for a year and a half as a 9 and 10-year-old because a teacher made a statement that my dad was going to come back after vacation's over. I mean, that's what her words meant to me, was that like a divorce is like a long vacation. So long probably was like 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, for a year and a half, I would sit up there so depressed, so angry. So I would beat myself so badly, verbally and mentally and all this stuff. I feel like the enemy was just sitting there with me with the encampment of all these voices from them that just made me feel like trash, that I would actually jump off that same roof to try to kill myself. I mean, that's like, it's crazy the ability that our words have to influence the trajectory of people. High school was chaos, like ADD, depression, anxiety, like these kind of things, getting put on prescriptions. And then like that doesn't let me find myself because like Adderall it was like taking me all over mental places. But I mean, it just helped me. Like my focus was anger and like sinful, like rebellion and all this stuff. So that's all I focused on. And by the time I graduated high school, I wanted to go play ball at Georgia. And something happened in my family where my cousin ended up losing his life coming out of Atlanta. And it was like drug related. And the hard part was that when my family said, we're not going to lose another son to North Georgia, and I couldn't go up to go play baseball, man, that just made me look at them. And I mean, it was as if I just like took my finger and said, you know what, I'm going to teach you why you should have let me go. And man, like by the time I was 19, I mean, man, it was like through a series of events of doing good things, was around some really bad people, like a girl that OD'd on a drug. And I took her to the emergency room, and because I didn't rat out the 3 drug dealers, they show up at my apartment with a keg going like, hey, this is out of respect for you not turning this in. I mean, when these guys are using their drug money to come buy alcohol and drugs and show up at my place, like dude, within 3 months, I'm selling drugs. And meanwhile, I'm still going to church every week, and I'm sitting there like showing up, and there's guys that I'm around looking at going like, y'all must be Christians and business owners and stuff. And I'm looking around seeing these guys, and I'm turning around selling like $180 a night worth of coke to them. And by the time I was 20 years old, I'm selling like $1,000 a night worth of drugs. I mean, just rolling with the wrong people, being in the wrong places. And man, I got on a list that was supposed to get like arrested, and I'd gone to jail now 5 times. I had over 16 traffic violations. I had all kinds of scenarios happen to me, but I remember just feeling like, man, I'm on this list that's like a prison list. This isn't like a probation officer, a friend's dad let me know like, hey man, they're like, you're in a bad place. And I was like, all right, I got to get out of here. And that's when I was 21. And man, I was like, all right, I'm taking 1 semester of school and I'm transferring to a college. And so I got about 2 hours away from here and went to Georgia Southern after I got all A's and a B, transferred, ended up at Georgia Southern. I was like right about 21 years old. I was still drinking, still drugs, still girls, still all that stuff. Like I was addicted to nicotine, all kinds of stuff for 12 and a half years. But anyway, all that, like that was like where I came from. So now here I am in university, like, and I'm away from like all my home life and all this stuff, and I'm finding my new people and new friends and stuff. And man, I remember waking up to banging on my door, and it was just like, I mean, keep in mind, my dad never came back. Like he never came back. Like
Right.
he never showed up to any game. He never showed up to anything. And dude, there's this banging on my door one morning, and I wake up like I'm all hungover. There's people passed out. I got drugs everywhere in our little duplex there. And I opened up the door, and it was my dad standing there. And my dad's literally going like, "Hey, son, you ready to go?" I mean, he was all chipper and all excited. I'm sitting there hungover, like trashed, and it's like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, go where,
Go
dad?
where?
Like, what are
Yeah.
you, yeah, I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, you don't remember talking to me? Man, we've been talking about this for months. And dude, I was so trashed all the time that like, I didn't even remember committing to going to some place with him. And he's like, if I
Wow.
show up to your door and I pick you up, will you come with me? So I'm literally sitting there like in 15 minutes, run back in, hit my bong and bowl. And I'm like sitting there grabbing a carton of cigarettes, and I throw all my stuff in the bag, and I come running out, jump in his car, and we start taking off. He's like, did you grab the Bible? I was like, no. Nah. He's like, he goes back, and he's like, man, I sent you this Bible 6 months ago. Like, go grab it. And so I go grab this Bible, and I never even used it, And man, I'm sitting there like jumping in his car, and man, like 30 minutes after small talk, he's like, well, grab that Bible real quick. Let me just share some stuff that I just want to share with you. I'm sitting over here still high. I'm still hungover. And I'm sitting in his car, like going like, all right, dad, whatever. And I remember he goes like, here's a highlighter, and he handed me a yellow highlighter. And I'm sitting there for the next like 2 hours listening to this man that I don't even know really. And he's just speaking so many like words of truth and these things to me where I'm like sitting here, I didn't know they were true, but I'm sitting there with my Bible going like, man, like this dude's saying the same
Right.
thing. And like, man, I'm just going to highlight this. I don't know what he's saying, but I'm going to come back because there's
Right.
something here. And dude, we were 3 days into this trip, and we're stopping at national parks, and we're stopping hiking. We're going to the mom and pop restaurants. I mean, nothing is like interstate. All of it's back roads. So we took 5 days to get from Statesboro, Georgia, 16 hours north to St. Louis. And dude, 3 nights in, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Tennessee, and me and my dad are sitting there. He's like, "Man, I tell you about being in the hospital." And I was like, "Nah, but you were in the hospital?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." About 7 months ago or 6 months ago, I was in the hospital, and it was about 12 days. I was like, really? And he's telling me this story, and what he starts sharing with me. I mean, keep in mind, like, man, I'm sitting here finally feeling like I have a father for the first time in my life, and I'm like 22 years old, and all of a sudden this man shows up, and I'm like, I don't even know you, but I want to know you, like you're investing something into me. And we're in this hotel room, and he looks over and he goes, yeah, so I went in with these problems going on, and they did the same test, and they were like finding out all this stuff. But basically, I've got the same heart disease that killed your grandpa, and it's a genetic disorder. I
Oh,
already had
wow.
you tested, like you didn't have it, like but your sister doesn't have it, but I have it. I'm the last one in the line to have it. And he's like, so they gave me 6 months to a year to live. And I'm like,
Wow.
dude, like, so what, dad, you're dying? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm laying on my bed. I got a pillow under my arms. I'm like laying on my stomach. You can picture it like dad sitting there looking at you. And I'm laying there like going like, yeah, dad, anything you say, I'm soaking it up. And he's like, tell me how he's in there for 11 days. And these doctors are diagnosing him every day, do the same test every day, send him around to the same specialist, get the same results. And he's like, yeah, so they're giving me 6 months to a year to live. And in my brain, I start thinking I'm giving up everything. Like I'm gonna come, like I will buy a tent if he won't let me live with him. I'll sleep in the woods next to his house. I'll sell all my stuff. I'll quit school. I'll quit drugs. I'll quit girls. Quit alcohol. Quit all this stuff. Like I just want to know this man because he's given me things I've never had, but I always desired.
Mm.
And I mean, it was all like the words he was speaking to me, like had such authority in it. And I remember laying there, and I'm like, I'm in my pillow at this point. Like I'm not even looking at him. I'm just bawling and I'm just crying. My dad's dying. And I'm sitting here going like, man, I just can't believe like I finally have a dad. And now God, you're like going to let him die, and you're going to take, and back then my perspective was that God is going to take him. And I was so angry, but yeah, I was still so hurt and crying. And I'm like making a plan. And I remember getting to the end of my list of give ups, like all that I'm going to give up. And it's like, I'm still not able to save my dad. I mean, I remember at that moment, I mean, like I'm in my pillow, I'm bawling, and I said, God, and I didn't say this out loud, so my dad never even heard it. Like this was just between me and him, and I was broken. And I just said, God, if you are who you say you are, then save my dad, and I'll give you everything.
Mm.
Jesus, if you are who you say you are, then you save my dad, and I'll give you everything. I mean, I remember saying it just like that, and I'm like in my spirit, like I'm in my heart, like I'm in this deep place, and I'm saying this to God. And I'll never forget, like 15 seconds after that, my dad's like, son, look at me. And I remember I'm sitting there like, I would never, dude, even now, it's as if I can muscle memory still feel the snot attached from my face to my pillow and this string that was up there. And I felt so embarrassed, like how bad I was bawling. And he said, hey, let me show you this dream that I had. or that my friend had, and he showed up at my hospital room, and he shared this dream with me. And at the end of this dream, I remember crying out, and I just said, God, if you let me die by this disease, then let me die for your glory. And if I live, then let me live for your glory. But whatever I got left in my life, let it be for your glory.
Come
And I
on.
remember just thinking, yeah, Dad, that's great. Like whatever. And I mean, that was like right after I'm praying all this stuff. And he says, so the next morning, I'm getting all my stuff together, and the doctor's like, they're coming in to discharge me. And he said, I'll never forget the doctor walking in with his head down. And he just looks at me and says, well, Mr. Pierce, we don't know how to say this to you, but we can't find anything wrong with your heart this morning.
Wow.
And he said, we did the same test
Wow.
3 times now, and we can't find anything wrong with your heart. And I'm laying there going, like, I'm in it 6 months later in a hotel room, bawling and crying. I just said, God, you saved my dad. I'll give you everything. And now after this story, my dad's telling me, and he's telling me like that in the middle of the night, no surgery, no operation, no nothing. Like he's miraculously been given a new heart, and he got the heart of a teenager that the doctors say, like, we don't know when you're going to die. It's like, you, and I'm sitting there just going like, so what? You're telling me like you're not going to die, Dad? And he's like, not from a heart disease. And I remember just sitting there being mad. Dude. I'm like, I feel set up. I'm like sitting here wiping snot, going like, all right, Dad. I grab my cigarettes and I walk out onto the patio, and I'm sitting out there smoking a cigarette, going like, and I'm just watching the ash. I'll never forget, man. Thunder and lightning peeling across the hills in Tennessee, and my ashes are doing this, and I'm going, am I a Christian now for real? So I'd love to say, man, I quit smoking cigarettes, I quit drinking, I quit girls, I quit drugs, I quit all that stuff. But I was more of that Ephesians 5, like God, like as husbands love their wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Like I didn't know this at the time, but I was sitting here playing poker, like blackjack with God, where I had all my chips, and I'd be like, all right, God, I'll give you like 15 minutes a night, 3 nights a week, and I'll read. And I would be sitting there like throwing in some time. I'd throw in some other things. And I'd throw these little like chips in there. Like I didn't really realize that's what I was doing, but I was like, all right, God, I'll give you, like, literally giving God everything to me. Came back from that weekend. And I said, I'll give you 3 nights a week, 15 minutes a night. And if you'll show yourself, I'll come back. But the moment you stop revealing yourself is the moment I'll stop coming, and I'll just call it a fluke.
Mm.
And I'll just say somehow my dad's heart just healed itself. And it was crazy. Like I didn't quit the drugs, the girls, all that stuff. I came back from that weekend, and I just started hiding away. I'm still having parties at my house with like 3 kegs and 150 people around my duplex. And I'd go lock myself in my room to go, all right, God, let me give you your 15 minutes. Like that was in my brain. That was my
Wow.
everything. This is so goofy. But what I found was like over 6 months, it started being like 5 nights a week, like 45
Mm.
minutes to an hour a night to 2 hours a night. And then next thing you know, it's like by the time I was a senior in college, I'm sitting in there every single night. I would walk away from a bar, put my drink down, never even go back. And it was just like, man, I'm just going home, and I'm just going to sit here and read this stuff.
Mm.
I mean, people would come and knock on my door, and I'm sitting here going like, oh God, get them away, get them away. Okay. All right, good. You keep talking, and it's like, and I guess I say all that, like, it's hard to picture it maybe, but it was like step by step. He says that he presents her, Ephesians 5, he says he presents her, his future bride, like he's presenting her to himself without spot, wrinkle, or blemish, and washes her clean with the washing of water, which is the washing of the word. And it was like, man, we want people to just miraculously have everything change in them. But that doesn't always, like, sometimes I'm only willing, like for me in Doug's testimony, I was only willing to give him like a little bit to wash off at a time. And so what happened was I stopped smoking after 12 and a half years, 30 cigarettes a day. Dude, a pack and a half a day, man. This was back when they were cheaper. But it was like, dude, I'm like spending hundreds of dollars on cigarettes already every couple of weeks, and then 30 cigarettes a day. And I remember because I read this one verse in 1 Corinthians 3:16 that says, do you not know that you are the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. And I was sitting here thinking, man, the only reason I'm still a Christian and still smoking is because this is the last little thing I want to hold on to, because this is going to help me not have to deal with the consequence of my sin in this world longer. Basically, I was trying to destroy my life a little bit at a time, one cigarette at a time. Even as a believer, I didn't know better yet. And I'm sitting back and I read that one verse, and it's like, man, I'm trying to destroy your temple, Lord. And I didn't even ask him if he wanted to smoke. I mean, I didn't even ask him if he wanted to smoke, because I know it's like, if I ask you like, hey, Lord, you mind if we smoke out your temple real quick? What's he going to say? I
Right.
mean, like, yeah, it's like, come on, son. Like, why would you even want to? And yet I'm
Right.
sitting back doing it nonstop, going like, all right, man. And I remember going home that night, and I got on my hands and knees and I prayed and I asked God to just cleanse his temple. And I mean, I spoke about everything I could think about that smoke affects in my temple. and then even the psychology of why I like smoking and the things I enjoy doing with it. And I remember getting up off the floor, feeling this peace flush through me that I'd never felt. And I had 12 cigarettes left in this pack. And I remember grabbing them. I threw them to this, my Grammy was visiting. And I remember walking by the door and I just threw them in there. And I was like, here, you can have them. I'm never touching them again. And she didn't smoke. So this was like a souvenir moment where I'm going like, she had been praying I'd quit for years and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I started smoking back when I was like 12. And I mean, it was just goofy, like stuff like that, where God's word would become so powerful that it would change my perspective into what I'm thinking and going, man, like I've got to change this thing because of what he says. And he revealed himself so true in it. I mean, I stopped selling weed. I stopped selling, like I would go into a strip club with a backpack and a pound of weed, like 100, like something like Vicodin, Valium, Xanax, or whatever, like pharmaceuticals in my bag. And I've got Coke in my bag. And I'm like walking into the strip club, like putting it on the back rooms. And it's like, this is like where I would go do business. And it's like, man, how horrible is that? And the reason why I quit doing stuff like that was because it said that he causes governments to rise up and he puts them in place. And it's like, so Jesus goes like, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar. And I remember reading that verse going, what does that even mean? He says like, respect the governments and authorities that are in rule over the land. And I'm going, man, if I got to respect them, God, then I can't be smoking drugs. If I get pulled over, if I can get a ticket, that means that's not respect. Like that means I'm not honoring them. And I stopped doing drugs and dealing with drugs simply because of one verse that talked about respecting the government and the laws of the land. How crazy is that? That like a guy who had been doing drugs since he was like early mid teenager would like throw those away because you said to respect the government. How crazy is that? Like to honor the laws. Like, and I mean, I just remember how powerful that one statement he would make would be when I let him speak to me. And so anyway, man, that's where I came from. That's why I said it'd be good for you to
Yeah.
frame me in because I
No,
don't know
you're
how long
good.
I just rambled, but dude, that's like, I mean, and that was like basically how I started walking into from all that stuff. Like I started walking into relationship with God was a man stopped and took time to make me the most valuable thing in his world and invest something of truth into me, like independently from like all the other stuff. I mean, it was like that was the first time, not just my dad, but anybody had really stopped for a whole week and gone, I'm going to make you my focus and I'm going to pour into you the things that you need to find life. And man, that radically changed my world. I mean, forever.